You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. "20-year-old Ethan was speeding down a deserted road. He had only recently gotten his license, but he had been driving since he was a teenager. His first teacher was his father. Together, they would race along these same empty highways when they came to visit his grandmother in the village. And now Ethan was driving from the village, but he wasn't alone anymore. And he felt grown up, free, independent. It was a wonderful feeling. Music was playing loudly in the car, and the trunk was packed full of gifts and village treats. Ethan had come to the village to help his beloved grandmother with her garden. He felt sorry for the elderly woman. She was so old now, completely withered, barely holding on, but she just couldn't give up a lifelong habit. Year after year, she would sow the beds, tend the plants, and harvest the crop in the autumn. She categorically refused to move to the city, closer to her adult children and grandchildren, so the relatives would take turns visiting the old woman, helping, chatting, sharing news. After getting his license and a car, an old black domestic model, Ethan started visiting his grandmother more often than others. There were several reasons for this, and they were all important to the young man. Firstly, as the youngest grandson, the only boy among numerous sisters, he had always been his grandmother's favorite. A special bond had long been established between them. They understood each other without words, feeling a deep kinship of souls. Next to his grandmother, Ethan still felt warm and cozy, just like in childhood. And secondly, she lived in the village, the beauty Chloe, the daughter of his grandmother's neighbors. In childhood, she seemed like a nasty and annoying girl to Ethan. Thin, pale, always complaining to her parents about the noisy boys, a group that included Ethan at the time. The boys tried to get revenge on the tattletale at every opportunity. Sometimes they would throw dry berries at her back. Sometimes they would invent offensive taunts and shout them right in the girl's face. But one day, when he came to visit his grandmother for the holidays, Ethan realized that everything had changed. Chloe had transformed from an awkward teenager into a beautiful young woman, and her character had changed too. She no longer complained about the boys or looked at them with contempt. Chloe was witty, laughed cheerfully, and there was always something to talk about with her. In short, on the eve of his final year of school, Ethan realized he was in love and began to show the girl attention. Sometimes he would give her a bouquet of wildflowers. Sometimes he would give her a ride to the post office on his bicycle. Sometimes he would help her carry a bucket from the well. But Ethan turned out to be just one of the crowd of Chloe's admirers. He had too many rivals. The girl clearly preferred Liam, a guy from the next street. This fact, it seemed, only fueled Ethan's feelings even more, and he decided to fight for his love. Chloe, like him, enrolled in university in the city after school, but Liam stayed in the village. His father was seriously ill, and his mother couldn't manage the care of her husband and the household alone. Without her eldest son, the family will have had a very hard time. So the young man stayed home, got a job, and continued to help his family cope with the difficult situation. Chloe came home every weekend, and the first thing she did was rush to her boyfriend. She would miss him during the week and eagerly awaited these meetings. Ethan believed that now he held all the cards. Liam remained in the village while he, Ethan, was in the city right next to Chloe. And he had even gotten his driver's license. His father had even given him a car after that. In his opinion, he was an eligible bachelor. But Chloe continued to treat Ethan like a friend, nothing more. Her heart belonged to Liam. Ethan couldn't understand the beauty's choice and refused to accept that she preferred someone else to him. He continued to persistently pursue Chloe's affection. "You're a good person, a very good person," the girl told him more than once. "You'll find your love, yet you'll fall for someone. Look around. There are so many beautiful women. I only need you," Ethan stubbornly insisted. "But that's impossible," Chloe shrugged. "Liam and I are getting married soon." Ethan tried to convince the girl that she was making a big mistake, showering her with bouquets and gifts, which she eventually just stopped accepting. He even stalked her. He hated Liam, with whom he had played a lot as a child. He pointed out the obvious flaws of his rival to Chloe, but nothing helped. After studying for 2 years in the city, the girl transferred to distance learning so she could be near Liam and help him care for his father. This was something Ethan just couldn't comprehend. His feelings for Chloe just wouldn't cool down. The girl was right. There were always many beautiful women around Ethan, but for some reason, none of them attracted his attention. Ethan often visited his grandmother also because of Chloe. Just seeing her, even from a distance, admiring her walk, her long, dark, shiny hair, her huge green eyes, that alone was happiness for him. It was a shame the girl didn't talk to him at all now. She even seemed to be afraid of him, trying to keep her distance. He had certainly overdone it with his persistent courtship, of course. But Ethan wasn't going to give up now either. A truly cunning plan was brewing in his head. The young man decided to approach it from Liam's side. He planned to somehow turn up at his work during the week with a couple of his friends, strong guys with bats, and have a serious talk. If he could manage to scare Liam and force him to break up with Chloe, who knows? Maybe the girl would pay attention to him then. She would need support, involvement, and he, of course, would be there at the right moment, gladly offering his shoulder. This is exactly what Ethan was thinking about now, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The road was smooth, empty, he could speed up. The young man felt like he wasn't driving, but flying over the ground. The forest bordered the road on both sides. The leaves were already starting to turn yellow. Soon the trees would be dressed in gold and crimson. Ethan hoped that by then, Chloe would finally be his. Of course, the young man understood that his plan, to put it mildly, reeked of meanness. But he believed that, in love, all's fair. Chloe had to be his. Period. Ethan was used to getting what he wanted since childhood. It had always been that way in his life. Suddenly, the young man noticed a small dark dot in the distance. It detached itself from the forest and quickly approached the highway. Ethan slowed down, alerted. Maybe some animal was crossing the road? A large one, apparently, and moving quite fast. Dusk was already falling. It was hard to see anything ahead. The distance between Ethan's car and the strange object kept shrinking. Soon the young man realized it wasn't an animal at all. A child was standing on the side of the road. This was unbelievable. It was about 50 kilometers to the nearest settlement and the same distance to the city. This place was deserted and uninhabited. How did a little kid end up here? Did he get lost in the forest? Ethan stopped next to the child, opened the door, and looked closely at the boy. He was clearly in a state of shock. A disheveled, frightened boy, about 10 years old, shaking violently. His clothes were crumpled and torn in several places. He looked utterly miserable. The child's face seemed vaguely familiar to Ethan, as if he had seen him somewhere before. "What happened?" he asked the boy, trying to speak calmly. The boy tried to answer, but only a choked wheeze escaped his throat. Ethan understood. It was from the fear he had experienced. The boy was very scared. "What happened?" The young man repeated his question, trying to make his voice as gentle and friendly as possible to calm the child. And then the boy burst into tears. Tears streamed from his eyes. He cried, trembling all over. At the same time, he was clearly trying to suppress the sobs tearing from his chest, trying to appear strong. Ethan's heart ached with pity for this frightened child. Poor thing, he must have gotten lost, suffered fear alone. The young man walked up to the boy and did something that was, in general, not his style. He hugged the kid tightly, pulling him close. The child immediately went limp in his arms and cried even harder, burying his face in his chest. Ethan stroked the boy's head and repeated that everything would be all right now, that it was all over, and he was safe. "No, it's not over!" The boy suddenly looked him straight in the eyes, pulling away. "Mom is there. Uncle Arthur is keeping her locked up. And now that I've run away, he'll kill her." "What?" A nasty chill ran down Ethan's spine. The theory about a boy lost in the forest, which have formed so neatly in his head, crumbled after these words from the foundling. Everything was much more serious if, of course, the boy was telling the truth and not fantasizing out of fear. "He took us away and kept us in a cage for a long time," the boy continued, sobbing. "Mom helped me escape, but he came back when I was leaving. I heard him coming toward the cabin. Now Mom will be in trouble because of me. It's my fault. Forest cabin, cages." Ethan couldn't understand yet what had happened there, but it all sounded terrifying and ominous. The young man realized that he himself was in danger because the mysterious Uncle Arthur could now run out onto the road after the child. "Let's call the police," Ethan suggested to the frightened boy, taking out his phone. "They'll come. You can tell them everything, okay?" "Yes! Just hurry!" The boy was in a panic, his eyes darting around. He was clearly very worried about his loved one, literally unable to sit still with fear, fidgeting with his clothes. Ethan looked at the child more closely. Large gray eyes, a slightly upturned nose, a scattering of freckles on a tanned face. Of course, the young man remembered where he had seen this boy. Just a couple of weeks ago, a woman and child had disappeared in the city. They had gone to the cinema and then hadn't returned home. All the lampposts were plastered with their photos, and these pictures kept appearing online. And then the news, as always happens in such cases, lost its relevance. A school burned down in the city, and a major incident occurred. Now everyone was only talking about those events. The search for the woman and child continued, but it no longer attracted as much interest as before. Their story had faded into the background. And now, standing before Ethan, was that very boy whose photos had been so frequently seen everywhere just recently. The young man even remembered his name. "Is your name Leo?" Ethan asked, looking into his eyes. "Yes," the boy nodded, his voice trembling. "Call the police quickly. Mom doesn't have much time. He'll get angry." Ethan, without wasting time, dialed the necessary numbers and briefly explained the situation to the dispatcher. He asked them to send a unit because a woman, the mother of the boy he had found on the road, was presumably in danger in the forest. The young man could only give his location approximately, but he was assured that his mobile signal had already been tracked and recorded, so they would find them. All that remained was to wait, trying to stay calm. Ethan invited the boy into the car so he could warm up and calm down a little. The child settled into the passenger seat next to the driver. "Maybe you want a chocolate bar?" Ethan remembered that he had an untouched bar in the glove compartment that he had brought for the trip. Leo shook his head negatively. He was clearly not thinking about food right now. Ethan saw that the boy was in a terrible state from the stress he had experienced and his anxiety for his mother. The young man really wanted to distract the child with something to make him feel better, but he didn't know what to do in such situations. So he just sat silently beside him, hugging Leo's thin shoulders, trying to convey his support. The kid, despite his young age, was a real hero. He managed to escape, find his way in the forest, run out to the road, and call for help. Ethan looked over Leo's head at the trees from which he had emerged onto the highway. What if that very Uncle Arthur was watching them from there right now, waiting for the moment to attack or do something? Ethan remained vigilant the whole time, ready to hit the gas and speed away from this dangerous place at any moment. Finally, flashing lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. The police. Ethan exhaled with relief, only now realizing how tense he had been all this time. 2 cars and a minivan with a small unit arrived. They were wearing helmets and bulletproof vests, tall, strong, dangerous looking. Uncle Arthur definitely wouldn't be able to handle them, Ethan thought with relief. "See, everything will be all right now." Ethan patted Leo encouragingly on the back. The boy looked at the people in uniform with hopeful eyes. His trembling had subsided a little. 2 men in plain clothes, apparently investigators, took the boy aside. They asked the child questions, probably clarifying the details of the story and the location of the cabin where Leo's mother remained. Finally, the people rushed into the forest, while Leo, Ethan, and several police officers remained on the road. All they could do was wait, hoping for the woman's speedy rescue. Ethan watched the boy, who kept his gaze fixed on the forest, waiting to see his mother. A woman in uniform approached Ethan, introduced herself as a police captain, and informed him that she needed to take his statement. The young man nodded, understanding that he was now an integral part of this whole story. He couldn't just leave. His participation was important. Time dragged on endlessly. Every minute felt like an eternity. An ambulance arrived and Leo was taken inside. The doctors probably needed to examine him and provide first aid after what he had been through. "No, I'm not going anywhere." The boy's voice suddenly rang out from the car. "I'm not going anywhere without Mom." Ethan understood that they wanted to take Leo to the hospital, but he couldn't leave until he knew his mother was okay. Ethan perfectly understood the boy's feelings, his anxiety and fear. The child jumped out of the ambulance and ran to him. Ethan took Leo's hand, squeezing the small palm tightly. They stood together on the roadside and looked into the forest, which seemed calm, impassive, completely ordinary. Ethan had driven past this spot many times during the 2 weeks that the boy and his mother had spent in the cabin, and he couldn't even imagine that something so terrifying and unthinkable was happening somewhere behind the trees. Finally, the police appeared, emerging from the forest thicket. First came those in helmets and bulletproof vests, walking quickly toward their minivan. 2 strong men were leading a man, overweight, in a stretched out red sweater and tracksuit bottoms with baggy knees. Ethan realized this was the Uncle Arthur, but he couldn't see his face. The man's hands were clasped behind his back, forcing him to walk literally bent in half. The boy squeezed Ethan's hand tighter, his gaze fixed on the man in the sweater. He followed him with a frightened look until he was pushed into the minivan and driven away. The car was already pulling away when 2 more police officers emerged from the forest. They were helping a slender woman with large gray eyes, just like Leo's, to walk. "Thank God she's alive!" Leo rushed to the woman, hugged her tightly around the waist, burying his face in her stomach. She wrapped her arms around her son's shoulders, pressing him close. They both sank into the grass by the roadside and sat there, silently looking at each other, unable to tear their eyes away. The police didn't disturb them. They understood everything perfectly, giving the mother and son a chance to experience this moment. Ethan watched the reunion of mother and son, and his heart was filled with a variety of feelings: relief, joy, compassion. The young man didn't immediately notice that tears were rolling down his cheeks. These were the emotions that had overwhelmed him all this time, finally finding an outlet. So much had happened. It was simply incredible. The plot of a gripping thriller had unfolded right before Ethan's eyes. Only here it was all real. The story ended well, thanks to a combination of circumstances and the boy's bravery. But the realization of what could have happened sent a chill down his spine, imagining the full horror the woman and child had endured. The woman and the boy got up from the grass together, embracing, accompanied, and supported by the police, and walked towards the ambulance. As they passed Ethan, Leo touched him with his hand and quietly said, "Thank you." Ethan just shook his head. What kind of thanks could there be? And what had he really done? He just called the police. That was all. It was his duty as a citizen. And then the young man met the gaze of the woman, the boy's mother. A beautiful face, regular features, and a smile. A wonderful, gentle smile, full of gratitude and warmth. Looking at her, it was hard to believe that this woman had faced so many trials. She had been held captive for several weeks and had just been in mortal danger, but it was completely unclear from her appearance. Ethan suddenly felt a strong desire to talk to her, to find out what had happened, to ask if she and the boy needed his help. But the woman and Leo were already being led to the ambulance. As she entered the vehicle, Leo's mother suddenly turned back to Ethan and smiled at him again, holding his gaze. The young man felt as if he had been struck by lightning from head to toe. It seemed that this smile made a greater impression on him than the rescue story itself. Ethan realized that he would often remember this episode, this woman, and her bright smile. The city was once again stirred by a story that had already begun to fade from memory. The woman and child, Sarah and Leo, had been found. What had happened to them was a ready-made plot for a thriller, full of tension and drama. Mother and son have become victims of Arthur, a man with a psychiatric diagnosis. Many acquaintances of this man had no idea that he was ill. Arthur had friends and a job. He led the life of an ordinary person. True, the 36-year-old man lived with his mother and didn't have a girlfriend, but that wasn't so strange in this day and age. It happens. Apparently, Arthur saw Sarah's photo on social media and fell in love with the beautiful woman. The presence of a child didn't stop him. His feelings were too strong. The man tried to start a relationship with the beauty. He wrote her long confessions of his feelings, waited for her with flowers outside her building, showing persistence. But Sarah, first politely and then in a more categorical manner, asked him to leave her alone, wanting no relationship. Arthur couldn't accept this. His obsession grew. Whether it was his character or a consequence of his illness, the man firmly decided to get what he wanted. He built a cabin in the forest, carefully prepared everything, even insulated the walls. He planned to keep his captives there in winter too. And then he took Sarah and Leo when they were returning from the cinema, ambushing them at the exit. Mother and son were searched for everywhere. Even theories about them being taken to another country were considered. And all this time, they were very close by, just a few dozen kilometers from the city. He kept us in cages, Sarah shared in an interview, recalling her experiences. He didn't touch us, didn't hit us, didn't threaten us, nothing that could be called violence. He brought food, cared for us in his own way, talked to us a lot, trying to establish contact. But of course, we were afraid of him, sensing his inadequacy. I realized that this person was unwell and capable of anything, so as soon as I had the chance, I helped my son escape. He brought help. He is my hero. Sarah and Leo became famous. Their story spread throughout the country. They even flew to the capital for talk shows, recounting what they had been through. Ethan was also invited to these shows and interviews, as he was the one who found the frightened boy on the road. But the young man refused. He didn't want all the fuss around his person. He watched Sarah, looked at her photos, admired her on the TV screen. Yes, Arthur could be understood. There was something very attractive about this woman, not just the external beauty, which was undoubtedly present. Charm, allure, charisma. Something elusive that made people gravitate towards her. And then, after a few weeks, this amazing story, as usually happens, was forgotten, faded into the shadow of new events. New topics for talk shows and scandalous articles appeared, public attention shifted, and so, about a month after everything happened, Sarah suddenly wrote to Ethan in a messenger app. She probably got his number from the police officers who took his statement. The woman thanked the young man for his help and offered to meet to discuss everything that had happened and express her gratitude in person. Of course, Ethan gladly agreed, his heart beating faster with anticipation. He really wanted to see this woman, hear her voice, learn about everything that had happened firsthand. After all, unlike other ordinary people, the young man understood perfectly well that he would never forget this story. He often recalled Sarah's smile directed at him and his feelings about it, something completely new to him. And sometimes he dreamt of Leo, just as the boy had emerged from the forest, disheveled, frightened, all crumpled and dirty. Ethan really wanted to know how the boy was doing now, if he had coped with the trauma. The boy hadn't participated in talk shows, and there was almost nothing said about him in articles. Obviously, Sarah was protecting her son from excessive attention. Well, she could be understood. It was the right decision. At the appointed time, Ethan arrived at the restaurant where Sarah had scheduled the meeting. He saw her immediately. She was sitting at a far table in the corner, looking thoughtfully out the window. Long chestnut hair framed a narrow face with regular features. A dark turtleneck and tight jeans emphasized her graceful form. Beautiful, composed, somehow a little detached, as if lost in her thoughts. Seeing this woman, some strange feelings stirred in Ethan's soul, mixed and complex. Nothing romantic, although Sarah's appearance certainly lent itself to such impulses. She was very attractive. Ethan still only dreamed of Chloe. His heart belonged to her. But Sarah clearly attracted him, intrigued him, occupied his thoughts with her unusualness and strength of spirit. "Good afternoon," Ethan greeted politely, approaching the table. A strange awkwardness suddenly overcame him, something that hadn't happened in a long time when talking to girls. And when the woman turned her gaze of incredible gray eyes on him, the young man even seemed to blush with embarrassment. "Hello." Sarah smiled charmingly. Her smile was warm and sincere. "Finally, I can thank you in person for everything you did. But I didn't do anything special. I just called the police. It was my duty as a citizen. But your son is a real hero. He saved both of you." Well, how to say it? Sarah's face darkened, remembering what she had been through. "Leo, he had run out to the road in a different place before he met you. He saw 2 or 3 cars driving past. He waved his hands, tried to attract attention, called for help, shouted. But they drove past. No one stopped." Ethan shook his head in shock, finding it hard to believe such indifference. He just couldn't comprehend it. How could anyone ignore a small child's plea for help? He could understand If people were afraid of an adult man on a deserted highway, but a boy, a 10-year-old child. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts, smiling sadly. It's not surprising, she said. People don't need extra problems. They're afraid. Who knows? Maybe they thought the child was a decoy. They wouldn't stop, and a gang of criminals would jump out of the forest, or they were afraid of something else. The world has become too dangerous. But you, if you hadn't stopped, who knows what he would have done to me. Seeing that Leo managed to get away, he started acting very strangely. I had never seen him like that before. He was furious and desperate. Sarah began to talk about him, about Arthur, recounting the details of their captivity. She didn't look like a victim at all. There was no fear in her eyes. In her gray eyes, Ethan noticed contempt, hatred, but not fear. There wasn't a shadow of the horror she had experienced. It seemed that Sarah was either a surprisingly strong woman or an excellent actress who managed to hide her true feelings behind a mask of calmness. He didn't harm you? Ethan asked. This question had been bothering him for weeks. In numerous interviews, this was tactfully omitted. Only captivity was mentioned. Sarah only said that she and her son were kept locked up in cages. They even showed photos of these structures. Ethan had seen these cages. Essentially, just a part of a room, fenced off with bars and a partition. The boy was in the smaller section, Sarah in the larger one. In the corners of both rooms, Ethan noticed inflatable mattresses with blankets and pillows. It was terrifying and unthinkable to imagine that a mother and son had been in such conditions for several weeks. Well, how to say it? Sarah pondered the question, choosing her words. Physically, no, he didn't touch us. He never hit us, didn't even touch us. His goal was to gain my affection peacefully. He talked to us a lot, to me, tried to please, to cater. He even sometimes brought dinner from an expensive restaurant for my son and me, like honored guests. Only I saw his patience was wearing thin every day. He became more irritable, angrier, even crazier. The climax was not far off. I felt it. The tension was building. A nasty chill ran down Ethan's spine. At these words, he suddenly felt how defenseless and powerless Sarah must have felt in the cabin. He imagined how afraid she was of what might happen to her and, most importantly, to her son. You asked if he harmed us, Sarah continued, looking into space. Physically, no, of course not. He didn't touch us. But how this incident will affect my son's psyche and character, even doctors don't know. Only time will tell. How is he? Ethan asked. Leo's fate interested him greatly. The young man was worried about the boy, hoping that he was okay and would recover from what he had been through. He seems to be doing well now, but Leo still sees a psychologist. These sessions help, of course. But sometimes my son wakes up at night. He dreams of something terrible. He screams in his sleep. True, he tells me he doesn't remember his dreams, trying not to upset me. So, of course, this whole situation left its mark on him. The trauma remained. And for this, and only for this, I hate Arthur. If it weren't for what's happening with Leo now, I would even feel sorry for him. A sick person, strong feelings, he couldn't cope with them. And then he sincerely believed that he was doing the best for himself and for me. In his sick mind, it was like that. What? Ethan couldn't believe his ears. Sarah had just felt sorry for Arthur, the man who had held her captive. In interviews, she had held herself completely differently, more sternly and categorically. Maybe I'm partly to blame myself, Sarah continued, her gaze becoming thoughtful. I saw that he fell in love with me at first sight. It was obvious. I didn't need him myself, completely not my type of man, neither in appearance nor in character. But like any woman, I like to flatter my ego, to feel desired. So sometimes I would smile at him, sometimes I would meet his eyes. I played. His reaction was pleasant to me. He would blush so sweetly, get embarrassed, and his eyes would literally light up with joy and delight. Knowing that you drive someone crazy, your self-esteem soars to the skies. It's important for any woman, especially after another failed romance, when you feel insecure. But I read that this Arthur that he saw on social media, just an interesting story for the press and also instructive, teaches young people to be more careful with online dating, not to trust strangers. In reality, it wasn't like that at all. Sarah shook her head. More precisely, not quite like that. The press distorted a lot. Will you tell me? Sarah smiled. Her smile was warm and inviting. Let's use you informally, okay? I understand that I'm about 10 years older than you, but when you address me formally, I feel like a complete old woman, like I'm your teacher or an elderly neighbor. Ethan nodded, feeling the awkwardness recede. He rephrased his question slightly. So you'll tell me what really happened? To you? Yes, I need to talk to someone. Tell everything as it was. Looking at you, I'm somehow sure you won't take this story to the press and won't gossip about it everywhere. You seem reliable. No, of course, I promise. I just want to know how it really happened without embellishments. I think about it a lot. About you, about Leo, about that day. It's not surprising because you also became a part of this story. A significant character, the one who changed the course of events. Of course, I'll tell you everything. If you have free time, because it will be long, there are many details. Ethan assured her that he was ready to listen to her until morning. He was incredibly interested. And the woman, taking a deep breath, began her story, delving into her memories. Sarah became a mother early while still a student. After her third year, she went to the sea for the first time without her parents, in the company of university friends, the beach, night discos, fun, drinking, all the delights of resort life. In short, that's where Sarah fell truly in love for the first time. And with whom? With an adult man about 15 years older than her, experienced and confident. But he was so handsome, also erudite and gallant, knew how to present himself. And importantly, he had money, which gave him certain opportunities. No, Sarah was never mercenary, but the money gave Leonid opportunities to court her beautifully. Restaurants, expensive attractions, gifts, all this combined with the man's charisma completely swept the young Sarah off her feet. She lost her head. The man didn't hide that he was married. He was honest with her. He had come to the resort town on a business trip. There was some important conference there for business matters. Sarah, of course, was a little upset at first, learning about his marital status, but then decided that whatever would be, would be. The main thing was that they were happy right here and now. She needed to enjoy the moment, take everything it could give. These wonderful days shouldn't be overshadowed by thoughts of something serious and insurmountable of the future. True, the evening before parting with Leonid, the girl couldn't help herself. She burst into tears, sitting on the seashore. She perfectly understood that the man would fly away to his distant city tomorrow, to his wife and children, and they would never see each other again. This was their last date. Sarah would be without his blue eyes with a cunning squint and charming smile, without Leonid's gentle, strong hands, his scent, which made her heart sweetly stop and her head spin. She would miss him. But don't cry. We had such a good time. Leonid awkwardly stroked Sarah's back, trying to comfort her. Comforting crying girls was clearly not his strong suit. The man couldn't find the words to console his young lover. He was flustered. "Give me your phone number," Sarah asked through tears. "I'll call you sometimes, just to hear your voice." In reality, Sarah dreamed of more. She hoped that with time, Leonid would realize how strong his feelings for her were, that she wasn't just a fling for him. But for that, there had to be some kind of communication, even if it was just by phone. That's unnecessary. Leonid tried very hard to make his voice sound soft and gentle, but the girl felt that he immediately tensed up after her request. "Everything that happened here will stay here. Let's not change anything. A holiday romance, it happens. It's just an adventure." Sarah looked up at the man who just moments ago had seemed to her the best man in the world, her only love. He said that phrase, holiday romance, in such a way that it immediately became clear to the girl. For Leonid, this was a common occurrence, and she herself was far from his only girl. There had been many. Sarah felt as if her eyes had opened. The veil had lifted. It seemed that Leonid had a lover on every business trip. It was his habit. The girl found the strength to break free from his embrace, turn around proudly, and leave without looking back. Of course, it was a bitter disappointment for her, her first love, and then such betrayal. But Sarah coped. She got through the pain. She was strong. Only, this wasn't the end of the story. A surprise awaited her. Upon returning home, the girl realized she was pregnant. That's where the real shock was. That was a blow. Seeing 2 lines on the test, Sarah was probably seriously scared for the first time in her life. Her heart was gripped by icy fear. What to do now? So much lay ahead. Explaining to her parents, arranging a new life, changes in her body, giving birth to a child. Difficulties loomed on the horizon, huge and frightening. And yet, Sarah firmly decided for herself that she would have this child, no matter what. That's how she got Leo, her son, in the maternity ward, holding the tiny warm creature in her arms. Sarah understood. It had all been worth it. All the suffering and doubts, and the arguments with her parents, and the misunderstandings with friends, and the difficult pregnancy. It was all worth it. Here he was, her gift, looking at her with trusting gray eyes, so similar to her own. For him, she was the whole world, the most important thing in his life. Of course, Sarah's father and mother helped her a lot. They supported her in a difficult time. They supported her physically and financially at a time when their daughter was so defenseless and vulnerable. Of course, she had to endure their sermons and lectures. They couldn't come to terms with the situation. They still couldn't understand that Sarah was now an adult, a mother herself, responsible for her own life and her son's life. To them, she remained a little foolish girl who needed supervision. Therefore, as soon as she had the opportunity, Sarah rented an apartment for herself and Leo to live separately. The girl transferred to distance learning at the university, got a job, and moved out of her parents' house. At this moment, the woman finally felt completely free, the mistress of her own life. Life began to sparkle with new colors, full of hopes and possibilities. Leo grew up, becoming more independent and sensible every day. She could talk to him like an adult. Sarah could now talk to him about a variety of topics. He was her friend and support. Mother and son cared for each other and enjoyed life to the fullest, both together and each in their own way, finding joy in simple things. Sarah started meeting friends. She occasionally had romances, light and uncomplicated. The woman wasn't planning anything serious for herself yet. She was happy just with her son. She and Leo lived well together. She didn't want to let anyone else into this well-established, cozy world to disturb the harmony. Romantic relationships were necessary for Sarah to lift her spirits, to feel like a woman. Thanks to men, their compliments, attention, and admiring glances, she felt like a woman. Beautiful, attractive, desired. She needed this like air, as confirmation of her worth. Apparently, the old trauma from meeting Leonid was still affecting her. Sarah had genuinely fallen in love with him then, with all her heart and soul, and he had made the young girl feel like one of many, ordinary. So now Sarah strove to feel unique, the only one, needed, special. This is what played a cruel trick on her with Arthur. The woman met him in a group of friends at an intellectual game. They had these interesting quiz games in their city, gathering different people. People, friends, acquaintances would gather in small teams to test their knowledge and logic. Then a meeting would be organized somewhere in a restaurant or cinema. The host would give interesting tasks. Sometimes you had to guess films by dialogues, sometimes songs or performers by description, sometimes answer tricky questions. There were many challenges, and they were all fun, intriguing, unexpected. Sarah liked discussing options with like-minded people, finding solutions, even arguing until hoarse. Their team never took prize places, but they didn't end up at the bottom of the list either. They held their own confidently. The core of the team was constant. The ideological inspirer and leader of the group was Olivia, Sarah's colleague, who had gotten her hooked on quizzes. With her were always the constant silent neighbor, Eleanor, and her husband, Andrew. And the other participants periodically changed, coming and going. Some, like Sarah herself, appeared from game to game, often skipping, but when they have free time, they would come to the quiz meeting. Sarah mostly knew these people. They were acquaintances, relatives, and colleagues of someone from the core team, Olivia, Eleanor, or Andrew. Occasionally, the team was joined by newcomers, fresh blood. Some of them didn't stay, played once or twice and didn't appear again. Or, on the contrary, they became regulars at quiz meetings, becoming part of the team. Arthur became one such newcomer. Seeing an unfamiliar face at another game, Sarah was naturally interested. It was always curious. The man looked a little older than her, overweight, short curly hair, a bright shirt, colorful shorts, a fleshy nose, small attentive eyes. There was something a little effeminate, awkward about his appearance. In short, he was somehow awkward, funny, but seemingly harmless, making you smile. He looked like either a hamster or a Pekingese. Usually in movies, such people have a light character and a sense of humor. Arthur indeed proved to be kind and cheerful. He was the life of the party that evening. He joked a lot, guessed most of the answers, pulling the team up to a respectable fourth place. Pleasant, easy to talk to, not stressful. Sarah, of course, couldn't help but notice the impression she made on him. It was obvious. Arthur, when he thought no one was looking, literally devoured Sarah with his eyes, openly admired her, looked at her with adoration. Sometimes their eyes would accidentally meet, and then the man would immediately look away and, it seemed, get embarrassed, blush. It was pleasant. It flattered her ego. Although Arthur didn't attract Sarah romantically, not at all, he wasn't her type. She liked a different type, like Daniel, with whom Sarah had broken up just the other day and was still upset about it, feeling abandoned, because he had broken up with her for someone else. A young, beautiful girl with long legs and a wasp waist. Sarah had seen her, a beauty of course, no arguing there, perfect. Again, the woman felt rejected and broken. It was an unpleasant feeling, familiar from her youth. Daniel. Sarah had a good time with him, but she didn't truly love him. She just enjoyed the moment, the light relationship. Therefore, it wasn't so much the woman's heart that suffered from the breakup, but her self-esteem, her confidence was shaken. And Arthur, with his eyes burning with admiration, was now boosting that self-esteem without even realizing it. He was like medicine. So Sarah deliberately added fuel to the fire, playing with him. Sometimes she would smile at Arthur. Sometimes she would praise his correct answer, singling him out from the others. And sometimes she would even casually touch the man's shoulder, as if reaching for chips or cola, creating an illusion of closeness. He would flinch every time at these touches, as if Arthur was trembling with excitement. This reaction, this game. Sarah played. She liked this feeling of power over a man, and watching the effect her supposedly accidental gestures had on Arthur was a great pleasure for her. She enjoyed it. At the end of the evening, everyone stood on the bar's porch and chatted. No one wanted to leave. It was fun. They discussed the game, joked, shared impressions. But everyone had work the next day, and people started saying goodbye and leaving one by one. The crowd gradually thinned out. Only the most persistent remained. It turned out that everyone had come in pairs, with husbands, boyfriends, or sisters, like Olivia and Eleanor. Only Sarah, as usual, had come alone. She was free. But Arthur was also alone. He had come by himself. As it turned out, Eleanor had invited him. They worked in the same office and often met in the smoking area. But Eleanor, as usual, was going home with her sister and her husband. So Arthur and Sarah ended up unpaired, left alone together. "Can I give you a ride?" Arthur asked, his eyes shining with hope, waiting for her consent. "I'm driving myself," Sarah smiled, feeling her power over this man. Right now, he would do anything she ordered. He was completely in her power. But the woman wasn't going to cross the line. She didn't want to give false hope. Yes, it was very pleasant to feel that you had such an effect on a person, on a man. It was flattering. But what was the point of blatant flirting if Arthur wasn't her type anyway? Yes, he was kind, funny, humorous, unique in his own way. But no, there definitely couldn't be any relationship between them. She didn't see him as her man. "Oh, okay," Arthur sighed in disappointment, his shoulders dropping. But we'll see each other again, right? Well, quiz games are held about twice a month, sometimes more often, Sarah replied evasively, not giving a direct promise. Maybe we'll see each other at the next game. She slipped into her car, not waiting for his answer. She was already looking forward to the evening drive through the city, when there were few cars and pedestrians on the roads and city lights twinkled everywhere, creating a magical atmosphere. Now she would turn on her favorite music, open the windows to let the wind blow through the car, and fly forward, enjoying her freedom. A wonderful end to the evening, she thought. Sarah missed the next quiz game. She had a lot of work, and Leo had long been promised a trip to the zoo. She wanted to spend time with her son. For some reason, the woman was sure Arthur had probably come to the meeting, and not just for the game itself, but hoping to see her. He hoped she would be there, Sarah, and was waiting for her. And indeed, Arthur was captured in the photo posted in the group a few days later. In some pictures, he looked somewhat lost and disappointed, as if he was looking for someone and hadn't found them. Or maybe Sarah had fantasized this whole story, exaggerated his interest. And then, 2 weeks later, there was another game. And this time Sarah decided to go. Why not? She didn't have any urgent matters anyway. Leo's holidays had started. Things had settled down at work. She could relax. Why not meet up with friends? She thought. The game was held in a bar in the city center. Sarah was a little late, misjudged the time, got caught in traffic. When she entered the hall, everyone was already there. The team had gathered. Arthur saw her. His eyes lit up with joy. He was clearly happy to see her. Sarah pretended not to notice, greeted everyone, and took her seat at the table. This time, Arthur was much more active. His behavior became more intrusive. He no longer hid his gaze, looking at Sarah, complimenting her, trying to help in some way, bringing her a drink, moving her chair, showing excessive care. And when the waitress took a long time to bring Sarah's order, he caused a huge scene, which embarrassed her. Everyone in the group noticed Arthur's obvious interest and even started making harmless jokes about it, teasing him. If last time this man's attention had flattered Sarah's self-esteem, now it was burdensome and unpleasant, causing discomfort. The woman tried to remain distant, cold, but at the same time polite, not wanting to offend him in front of everyone. It was her own fault. She shouldn't have practiced her charms back then, she thought with annoyance. But Arthur didn't seem to understand hints. He was too engrossed. He had swapped places with one of the guys and was now sitting next to Sarah constantly, as if by chance, touching her hand, her shoulder. Sarah could barely wait for the game to end, said goodbye to everyone, and walked quickly to the parking lot, wanting to leave as soon as possible. This time she refused the offer to walk in the park with the large, noisy group, although she usually loved such walks. But Arthur was there now, and she knew he wouldn't leave her alone. It was awkward to rudely brush off the man in front of everyone, but Sarah wasn't going to tolerate his intrusive courtship either. He met her in the parking lot, as if he had been waiting. It was already dark, so Sarah didn't immediately notice Arthur waiting for her by the car, standing in the shadows. The woman even flinched in surprise when she heard his voice emerge from the darkness. "Can you help me?" he asked, coming closer. "What?" Sarah tried not to sound too annoyed, although inside She was seething with frustration. She hadn't gone for a walk with her friends just because this intrusive admirer was there. And now here he was asking for some kind of help. My car's in the shop. It broke down, so I'm walking today. It's a long way for me. Can you give me a ride to the center? It's on your way anyway. Sarah thought she had seen Arthur holding car keys that evening, but maybe she was just tired and it seemed that way. Okay, of course. The woman smiled politely, not wanting to seem rude, and opened the door for him, inviting him into the car. On the way, Arthur talked her ear off, talking about everything and anything, clearly trying to find a topic that would interest Sarah, to find common ground. But she remained cold and detached, nodding occasionally, but not participating in the conversation, answering monosyllabically. She felt uncomfortable next to Arthur. His presence was oppressive. At their first meeting, he had seemed interesting, bright, unusual, an extraordinary creative personality, a person who wasn't afraid to be funny and rejected stereotypes. Now Arthur just looked strange and awkward, evoking pity. She had hooked him. Sarah understood this perfectly. He was obsessed with her. Arthur used every second they were on the road to impress her, trying his absolute best. He even sweated from the tension. A pathetic sight, of course. But Sarah tried not to show her true feelings, politely smiled at the passenger's jokes, answered his question monosyllabically, pretended to be carefully watching the road and not wanting to be distracted. And she waited for the moment when she could finally drop off her companion. His presence was very burdensome. I'll drop you off here, Sarah said, stopping. Otherwise, I have to turn onto my road further on in a different direction. Sarah parked near a deserted bus stop where no one was around. Arthur clearly didn't want to part with her. He just sat there talking about something, looking at her desperately, with his small eyes full of pleading. He was close to panic, as if afraid to be left alone. It looked strange, very strange. Sarah had never encountered anything like this before. How could she politely get rid of this lovesick chatterbox without offending him, without causing a negative reaction? I have to go, she interrupted her companion, looking at her watch. My son is waiting at home. He's alone. Maybe mentioning the child would cool Arthur's ardor a little, and the man would understand that she wasn't just a beautiful girl with whom he could spend time easily and without obligations, but a woman with a child who had responsibilities. So you have a son? Arthur exclaimed, his eyes widening in surprise. The admiration in his eyes didn't diminish, rather the opposite, as if it made her even more attractive. Yes, and he's completely alone at home right now. He's called several times. He's worried. Go, of course. I won't keep you. Arthur reached for the door handle, but then turned back and asked a question that was clearly bothering him. And a husband? Do you have a husband? No, I'm raising him alone, Sarah blurted out automatically, and immediately regretted saying it, realizing her mistake. She should have lied and said she had someone, a man. Otherwise, it seemed like she herself had given Arthur a reason for further courtship, opened the way for him. See you around? The man smiled broadly, his face shining with hope, and finally left the car. Sarah pressed the gas pedal to the floor with relief, driving away as quickly as possible. No, she wasn't going to meet Arthur again. It was too difficult. To avoid running into the unwanted admirer, Sarah stopped going to the games, although she enjoyed the activity. Olivia, of course, often invited her, but Sarah constantly came up with reasons to refuse, citing busyness. It was a shame, of course. She liked spending time with these pleasant, cheerful people. They were good company. But now Arthur had become a regular on the team, and she didn't want to see him. Artie keeps asking about you, Olivia shared with her colleague and friend one day. He's trying to get your phone number from me very persistently. I promised to ask you if I could give it to him. So, can I? No, Sarah exclaimed, her voice full of determination. Absolutely not. Don't even think about it. It's your business, of course, but he seems like a decent guy, Olivia said thoughtfully. He works, he's kind, very generous, and he has a good sense of humor. Not boring. And he seems to be seriously in love with you. Head over heels. He's constantly trying to find out things about you from us, as if by chance asking questions. But nothing escapes me. I see everything. Liv, please tell him that I have a significant other. A man, Sarah asked, feeling awkward. Tell him not to hope. It's useless. He's just not my type at all. You understand? I don't like him. I understand, of course, what's not to understand. Everyone has their own tastes. Did you stop going to the quiz because of him? Sarah thought for a moment and nodded, confessing to her friend. She was tired of hiding the truth from her friend. It was difficult. I need to tell Eleanor to stop inviting him, Olivia said thoughtfully, making a decision. He's a valuable member of the team. Of course, he knows a lot, he's knowledgeable, but my friend is more important, and he works with Eleanor, right? Yes, her colleague. He works in the design department, Sarah confirmed, hoping this would solve the problem. More time passed, several months, and then one day, Olivia announced that Arthur wasn't coming to the quiz anymore. He had missed several games in a row. He understood that you weren't showing up and apparently lost interest. His motivation disappeared. He was only coming to the meetings because of you. It seems you were his goal. So come back. There's nothing to fear anymore. He's gone. But Sarah was in the midst of a new romance with a handsome, well-built guy, slightly younger than her. She had recently met him at the gym where she had started going. Tall, reasonably fit, stylish, everything she liked, her ideal. So now Sarah was going on dates with Daniel in the evenings. She didn't have time for quizzes and old acquaintances. Only Arthur still found a way to contact her. He was persistent. He found her page on a social network and started. The man went through and didn't hesitate to like every single one of her photos, even the oldest ones. And now every day he sent her messages, sometimes congratulating her on a holiday, sometimes wishing her a good day, sometimes just sending cute pictures, kittens, flowers, hearts. Like a teenager, honestly, he behaved like a child. Sarah, of course, didn't respond. She ignored him. Any normal person would understand that enough was enough. They didn't want to communicate with you. It was time to stop, to end the pursuit. But not Arthur. He didn't understand hints. And then one day, Arthur sent her a letter with an offer to go to a movie premiere together. He suggested taking her son with them. He wanted to meet him, establish contact. Sarah replied that she was in a relationship, and Daniel, her man, probably wouldn't like it. It would be inappropriate. After that, there was no news from Arthur for a couple of days. He was silent. Sarah had already decided that it was all over. The problem had solved itself. But no, the situation only worsened, taking a new turn. One evening, leaving the office, Sarah ran into a beaming Arthur who was waiting for her. It was already December. The weather was bitterly cold outside. A biting wind was blowing. It was unknown how long Arthur had stood by the office gates waiting for the object of his love. He was clearly frozen. His fleshy nose was completely red from the cold. The huge bouquet of roses in his hands was covered in frost. The flowers were frozen. But the man didn't seem to notice. His eyes were burning. At the sight of Sarah, his eyes shone with a truly puppy-like delight, full of adoration. The woman didn't take the flowers from him then, and very harshly asked him to leave her alone, to stop stalking her. Yes, she had to offend the intrusive admirer, be rude. But what could she do if he didn't understand any other way? If he ignored all hints? "I will fight," Arthur said softly. Looking at Sarah sadly, his voice sounded determined. "I know that you have to fight for love, and everything will be fine. I will win you over." Sarah sighed heavily and headed towards her car, feeling anxious. The last thing she needed was for him to actually start fighting for her. It would be terrible. Arthur went into hiding for a while, as if waiting. For about a month, he didn't show himself in any way. Didn't write, didn't call, didn't appear. And Sarah relaxed. She even somehow forgot about him, thinking that her problem was now finally solved. Sarah had a wonderful New Year's holiday, full of joy. She went to a ski resort with Daniel and Leo. They vacationed together. They walked a lot, went sledding and tubing, built snowmen, had snowball fights, have fun. Sarah even learned snowboarding under Daniel's guidance, which she was incredibly proud of. It was a new achievement. But all good things come to an end quickly. The holidays were replaced by weekdays. It was time to return to work. Sarah went back to work, returned to routine matters and worries. One evening, closer to night, Daniel called her. His voice sounded strange. He was on a business trip in another city at that moment. "What's going on?" The man's voice sounded strange, either upset or confused or accusatory. "Everything seems normal, nothing unusual," replied Sarah, who understood nothing, feeling bewildered. She felt like she was being accused of something, but she couldn't understand what. Her conscience was absolutely clear. "So it's normal to meet another man while your man is on a business trip to deceive him?" "What are you talking about? I'm not with anyone." Sarah tried to object. "Don't lie to me. I trusted you so much, and you betrayed me." "Well, I can explain," she tried. "They've already sent me your photos. It's useless to deny it. I've seen everything." "What kind of photos?" Sarah absolutely didn't understand what he was talking about. Her brain refused to process the information. But Daniel's voice sounded offended and disappointed. There was pain in it. "There's nothing more for us to talk about. It's over." Daniel hung up, ending the conversation. And Sarah sat over her report for a long time afterward, trying to gather her thoughts to understand what had happened. And only when she got home, she understood what was going on. When she went online. When she went to her social media page, there was another message from Arthur. "Photos from our date. I'm so happy. I love you, darling." Sarah read the caption under the folder of files. aloud. The woman clicked on the yellow icon and gasped in surprise. Her heart stopped. Before her were pictures. They showed her posing in the arms of Arthur, who was looking at her lovingly. Sarah was smiling charmingly. Arthur was gently hugging her. In some photos, they were even kissing, looking like a happy couple. Sarah had never been to these places shown in the photos, and certainly had never kissed Arthur. It was absurd, but the pictures looked surprisingly realistic, as if they were real. Someone had skillfully edited the photos in a special program. Clearly better than Photoshop. It was a professional's work. Arthur works in the design department, Olivia said. He probably knows how to do things like that. But why? Why did he do this? Ruining her life, and he even sent the photos to Daniel, destroying her relationship. Apparently, she would have to tell Daniel about the intrusive admirer who wouldn't leave her alone, explain the whole situation. Arthur was now truly frightening Sarah. His actions were unpredictable. Before, he had only been annoying, burdensome, causing dislike and pity. But after this situation with the photos, he was frightening. His behavior had become dangerous. His attachment to her now seemed like an obsession, an unhealthy mania. And the man's mental health, it raised serious questions for Sarah. A normal person just couldn't behave like that. At this time, a new message arrived from Arthur confirming her worst fears. Just look how great we look together in these photos. I can't stop admiring our photos. They are so beautiful, he wrote, clearly proud of his work. Sarah called Daniel, tried to explain everything to him, tell him about the stalker, but he wouldn't listen. He was too offended. It was hurtful and unfair. If Daniel had truly valued and loved her, he wouldn't have given up so easily. He would have listened to her. Even this eccentric Arthur is fighting for her like that. No obstacles bother him. He goes head first. But here, maybe Daniel never had real feelings for her. It was just a crush. And to be completely honest, their relationship had become somewhat cool lately. They had drifted apart. The trip to the ski resort fixed the situation for a short time, but overall, the relationship had run its course, and she had to admit it. Sarah was alone again. Her heart was broken. She blocked her social media page so she wouldn't be upset by Arthur's letters and actions. She even got a job somewhere else, changing offices. And not just because Arthur occasionally met her at the gates at the end of the workday, waiting for her. She simply found a place with a higher salary and better conditions. It was beneficial. Sarah stopped going to the quiz altogether. Her former life was in the past. Communication with old acquaintances gradually faded away. There was no time or desire. The woman had no time. Such a period in her life had arrived. Work, son, apartment renovation, domestic chores. Life had spun her around, absorbed her. Arthur, much to Sarah's relief, finally disappeared from the radar. He was no longer seen. Now he didn't know where to look for her, where she worked and lived. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. She hoped for that. Sarah sincerely hoped that the man had found a significant other and was now pouring the entire stream of his unspent tenderness onto this lucky woman, leaving her in peace. Several more months passed. Autumn arrived. By then, Sarah had forgotten about Arthur. He had become just an unpleasant memory. She had a new life, new worries and troubles. She was moving on. On that warm autumn evening, Sarah decided to take her son to the cinema. They had been planning it for a long time. Her car had broken down and had been in the service center for a week for repairs. So after the movie, she had to call a taxi to get home. It was already late, buses were infrequent, and she and Leo were tired. It had been a busy and eventful day. Soon, a gray car, the summoned taxi, pulled up. Sarah and Leo settled comfortably in the back seat, buckling up. The driver, an overweight man in a cap with a wide brim, greeted them hoarsely and confirmed the destination. Where to go. Everything as usual, a normal trip. And the car sped off along the semi-empty city roads, heading home. At this time, there were very few cars on them. Traffic was light. Sarah and Leo were engrossed in discussing the movie they had just seen, sharing their impressions. Therefore, they didn't immediately notice that the driver had turned the wrong way, driving down an unfamiliar street. Only much later, when fields and forests flashed by outside, Sarah came to her senses, sensing that something was wrong. I don't understand. Are we taking the bypass? Not through the city? That's far. We need to go to one of the streets. This is in the other direction, Sarah said, addressing the driver. The driver didn't answer, continuing to drive. Instead, the woman heard a characteristic click. The man had locked the doors for some reason, preventing them from getting out. Sarah realized something was happening. Something very bad. A nasty chill ran down her spine, a premonition of trouble. What are you doing? Sarah tried to make her voice sound authoritative and calm, not betraying her fear. The last thing she needed was to scare Leo. He had already sensed something was wrong too, and had fallen silent. And then the driver turned around, taking off his cap. Sarah flinched. Her heart plummeted. She recognized Arthur. I think I laughed then, Sarah recalled, thoughtfully twirling a strand of her long hair around her finger, telling Ethan her story. Meanwhile, he watched her intently, hanging on her every word, immersed in the narrative. She told the story so vividly that scenes from a tense and terrifying film seemed to unfold before the young man's eyes. And here was the climax. The main villain reveals his face, exposing his cunning plan. Yes, Sarah laughed. She continued, but it was a nervous laugh, a laugh of horror and despair. The woman immediately understood. Things were bad, very bad. The familiar face didn't calm her. Quite the opposite. It caused panic. Sarah realized she was trapped by the strange, obsessed Arthur. And worst of all, Leo, her son, was now in his power. What would happen to them next? She didn't know. The prospects were unclear and very uncertain, full of danger. Right now! Stop the car! Sarah gathered all her willpower to not appear frightened in front of her son and in front of him. She remembered the influence she had had on this man before, how pliable he had been. Maybe it would work now too. He had been ready to do anything for her. At least that's what he said. I will stop, of course, but later, not now. Arthur was now watching the road carefully, his face serious. Soon you'll understand that this will be better for all of us. For whom? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The hope for a favorable outcome was fading before her eyes like smoke. For you, for me, for him, for Leo, for all of us, we will be together. You'll see, we'll be happy together like one family. Where are you taking us? Sarah asked, trying to understand his intentions. To a very good place, our new home. You'll like it there, I'm sure. Then Arthur turned around and winked cheerfully at Leo, trying to encourage him. The boy sat there half dead with fear, not understanding what was happening. The boy guessed something terrible was happening, something abnormal. But he didn't understand exactly what yet and was afraid to ask. The car rolled further and further down the country highway, away from the city. Very rarely did other cars come towards them. The road was deserted. It was dark outside the windows. Nothing could be seen. Only the silhouettes of trees. Sarah had no idea where they were or where they were being taken. A sticky cold fear churned in her stomach, gripping her whole body. "Let us go," Leo finally spoke up, unable to bear the tension. The boy looked so frightened and pathetic that Sarah's heart ached with pain for him. "Oh, why? Don't be afraid," Arthur gently countered him, his voice calm. So far, he showed no signs of aggression, but who knew what would happen next? His behavior was unpredictable. "I want to go home, to my place," Leo answered honestly, his voice trembling. "And what's so good there?" Arthur asked, trying to convince him. "Your mom runs off to work in the morning. You rush to school, always busy. Homework, tests, assignments, after-school activities. I also know you go swimming 3 times a week. You're always rushing somewhere. Constant hustle and bustle. You hardly see each other. But with me, you'll be together all the time, as children should be with their parents, like a real family. I'll take care of you, I promise you. You'll have everything." Leo sighed and stared out the window, his face sad. He squeezed his mother's hand tightly. The boy's palm was sweaty and yet very cold with fear. And Sarah thought, trying to work out a tactic. So Arthur was taking them somewhere unknown, to some hideout of his. Apparently, he had been watching them for a long time, gathering information. He even knew that Leo went to the pool 3 times a week. He knew their schedule. And he ambushed them at the cinema, which meant he knew they had gone to the movies. He was following them. Judging by everything, Arthur didn't intend to do anything bad. In his own understanding, at least for now, he wanted to be their family. So, she had to behave quietly and compliantly, not to anger the sick man, not to provoke him. And Sarah no longer doubted that Arthur was ill. It was obvious. She had noticed some oddities about this man before. His inadequacy. Take his bright outfits and the inadequacy of his behavior in essence. But at first it was attributed to his creative nature, and then to being strongly in love. Sarah chose this tactic for herself. Wait, watch, don't provoke aggression. Don't argue with him. And then she would see how to act, how to find an opportunity to escape. Arthur turned off the paved road. The car shook over some bumps, off-road. Sarah felt the bottom of the car scrape against grass, against stones. It seemed they would get stuck any moment, get bogged down in a hole or mud. The car wouldn't be able to go on. But it seemed Arthur knew the way perfectly. This place was familiar to him. He drove steadily forward, saying that they were almost home. They would arrive very soon. Finally, the man stopped the car. The journey was over. Before unlocking the doors, he warned, his voice becoming harsher. "Don't even think about running. I have this." And the man, with a gentle smile, showed them a crossbow that lay on the front seat. Sarah didn't know if it was real or a sports one, but it looked impressive, dangerous, and quite deadly. I'm very accurate. I shoot well. Arthur was clearly proud of this fact, demonstrating his skill. Then he unlocked the doors and ordered his captives to get out of the car. They obeyed. What else could they do? Resistance was useless. It was dark all around, impenetrable darkness. Not like in the city, where the outlines of objects are visible in the light from neon signs, street lights, and house windows. No, there was impenetrable darkness in which nothing could be seen, as if the world had disappeared. Sarah only realized that they were in the forest, deep in the thicket. Arthur took her hand firmly, but at the same time gently. Somehow his touch was strange. And you, boy, hold on to your mother, or we'll get lost in the dark. Sarah nodded, agreeing. Leo had long since clung to her and was trembling with fear, like an aspen leaf. The woman stroked her son's back reassuringly, promised that everything would be all right. Although she herself greatly doubted it, the future was unclear. Arthur turned on a flashlight, which illuminated a narrow path and led Sarah and Leo after him. They walked for quite a long time, pushing through bushes and branches. The woman and the boy stumbled, but the man walked steadily and confidently. Clearly having been here often and knowing where to step, every step was familiar. Finally, they reached the cabin, a clearing in the trees. Right in the middle of the forest stood something resembling a village house. A gable roof, shutters on the windows, even a porch with shaky steps, like something out of a fairy tale. "What is this?" Sarah asked in surprise, her voice sounding bewildered. The house in the middle of the forest looked too unnatural, like something from a scary fairy tale or a horror movie. "My grandfather and I built this a long time ago, when I was little." Arthur began to explain, his face becoming dreamy. "They used to bring me to visit him in the village, and we loved walking in the forest, exploring the surroundings. He, by the way, taught me how to use a crossbow here, how to shoot at targets. We built this house for a long time," Grandpa used to say. "You never know, maybe there'll be a war, and we'll have to hide in the forest, have a shelter." Sarah concluded that Arthur's illness was probably familial, inherited. It seemed his grandfather was also a strange man with unusual ideas. "You know, we dug such a deep cellar," the man continued to recall his childhood, his eyes burning, "and made a canned food storage there just in case, for survival. Come in, don't be shy." Arthur opened the unexpectedly strong, heavy door with a key and let his guests go first, inviting them inside. He followed and locked the door, cutting off their escape route. He took a kerosene lamp from a cabinet, lit it, and Sarah finally had a chance to look around in the dim light. Almost an ordinary room in a village house, simple and modest. In the center, a round table on curved legs, several Vienna chairs around it. In the corner, an old, worn-out sofa covered with a blanket. Near the wall with windows, right between them, a tall, narrow cabinet. A simple and painfully familiar interior, as if from the past. Sarah had seen something similar when she stayed at her cousin's house in the village as a child. But the room was sharply different from an ordinary living space. There was something frightening about it. It was all about the bars, with which someone, most likely Arthur himself, had fenced off a part of the space, turning it into a prison. It looked like a cell for dangerous defendants from a courtroom, only much larger and more primitive. From the inside, this cage was divided by a wall, brick, solid. It went from the floor almost to the ceiling, creating two compartments. Is this, did you and Grandpa make this too? Sarah unexpectedly chuckled, nervously and awkwardly. She suddenly felt amused when she imagined this scene. A grandfather and grandson fencing off part of the room with bars, building walls out of bricks. It somehow looked delusional, but also funny at the same time, absurd. No, I did this myself, Arthur admitted, his face becoming serious. I was preparing for your arrival. I planned everything. I even had to take a vacation from work to get everything done, to prepare our home. Sarah understood that she and Leo would now be driven into cages, into this makeshift prison. She couldn't allow this. It was terrible. There, behind bars, Sarah would be too defenseless, too vulnerable, deprived of the ability to act. She and her son will have practically no chance of escaping. They will become completely dependent on him. Why cages? We won't go anywhere from here anyway. Sarah tried to reason with Arthur, pretending to be calm. First, we don't know the way. We'll get lost in the forest. Second, it's so cozy here with you. So nice, quiet, peaceful. There's no one around. No one will bother us. Why would we leave such a good place, our home? Leo looked at his mother with wide eyes, trying to understand what was happening, and remained silent, clinging to her. The woman saw that her son understood her tactic and was playing along as best he could. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging to be let go. He was trying to pretend that he was quite comfortable and not scared here, as long as Arthur didn't guess their true feelings. These aren't cages. This is your room, Arthur explained with a smile, trying to calm them. I'm very glad you like it here, Sarah. I tried my best, cleaned and washed everything for your arrival, prepared everything. But you'll have to live in these rooms, behind bars, for now. I don't trust you yet. I'm afraid of losing you. You are too precious to me. Arthur took a bunch of keys from his pocket, opened the door in the larger cage, and gestured for Sarah to enter, inviting her inside. She obeyed. She had no choice. What else could she do? Angering a sick man who also possessed an impressive crossbow was life-threatening. Right now he was in a benevolent mood, but everything could change in a second. His mood could change drastically. They were alone in the middle of the forest. There was no help to be expected. She had to be careful. Then Arthur put Leo in the other section of the cage, in his room. Now mother and son were separated by a brick wall, and from the rest of the world, they were separated by a strong steel grate, the bars of which were thick. Of course, they could see each other when they came to the bars of the cage, and they could even touch hands through the grate. But this separation was very frightening. It symbolized their captivity. It would have been much more pleasant to be together and be able to hug each other, to comfort each other. In the corner of her room, Sarah noticed an inflatable mattress covered with a soft blanket with patterns of red roses. Apparently, Arthur was trying to make it cozy. And also a bucket, the purpose of which the woman, of course, immediately guessed. It was a toilet. Arthur didn't intend to let them out for a long time. That was clear. The woman suddenly felt nauseous from the stress she had experienced. The fear for the future the worries about her son. What was all this for him? He wasn't to blame for anything? Well, you're settled in. Now you have your own home. Arthur sat on the table in front of the cage and looked at his captives with tenderness, as if they were his favorite toys. How long I've waited for this moment, Sarah. I've missed you very much. I wanted to be near you. And then he told his story, and the woman realized that she was indeed dealing with a mentally ill person with a sick mind. Arthur had been different from other people since childhood. He was special. He began to realize this closer to school when he started comparing himself to others. He wasn't interested in games with children, cartoons, socializing, everything that his peers liked. He preferred to sit in a corner somewhere and pour grain from one glass to another, watching the process. The boy could watch for hours as the grains flowed back and forth. It fascinated him, put him in a trance, and Artie always had a developed imagination, very vivid and unusual. Puddles seemed to him like gates to another world, clouds like points from which evil creatures watch people, trees like evil trolls disguised as plants to weaken the vigilance of their victims and eat them. The world seemed to the child a dangerous, evil place full of threats, so he preferred to stay in his room in safety. The street, the noise of the crowd, open, bright spaces, all this frightened him very much, caused panic. But his mother, Arthur's mother, didn't agree with this state of affairs. She wanted her son to be like everyone else. She was sure that her son needed socialization, communication with other children. The boy didn't attend kindergarten because he was often sick. He didn't want to go out into the yard. He was afraid. So his mother dragged him to crowded places, playgrounds, theaters, some parks and squares, trying to adapt him. Sometimes, against Arthur's will, she would push him into a crowd of children, thinking that gradually her son would fit in, find friends. But it didn't work. He was too different. The children felt that Artie was different and didn't accept him into their games. At best, they avoided him. At worst, they teased him, hurt him, mocked him. But his mother was always there, protecting him. Like a hawk, she would swoop down on her son's tormentors and stand in front of her beloved baby, shielding him from the world. Only, it's impossible to be constantly under your mother's protection. Sooner or later, you have to face reality. School started, and he was left alone with cruel children and indifferent teachers who didn't notice his suffering. And with this strange, incomprehensible world from which poor Artie so desperately wanted to hide, to shut himself off. At school, Arthur was bullied from the very first grade. He was an outcast. They teased him, pinched him, took his things, pushed him, flicked his nose, humiliated him. But they never seriously beat him, never fought. What pleasure was there in fighting with such a helpless weakling who couldn't fight back? Artie didn't study well. He didn't socialize with children. His interests were elsewhere. Sometimes coming home, he would immediately retreat to his room and close the door behind him, shutting himself off from the world. Here he felt safe and could talk without eavesdroppers to his friend, the only one, but the most loyal and reliable, who was always by his side. It was a ginger, slightly overweight boy with bright green eyes, sometimes shining like spotlights, as if he had a flashlight inside him. He first appeared when Arthur was about 5 years old, And since then, he had always been there, growing up and changing with Artie. He was his shadow. His name was Friend. Friend was very smart and supported Artie in everything, giving him advice. It was he who once prompted him to trip Nick, a classmate who tormented Arthur more than other, mocked him. The boy then fell down the stairs so spectacularly, head over heels. How he screamed in pain. In the end, he broke his leg and split his head open. He didn't appear at school for a long time after that. Beautiful. Thanks, Friend. You helped me get revenge. And in general, Friend suggested many useful ideas to his friend that helped him survive in this hostile world. Heat a thermometer on the radiator to pretend to be sick and not go to school, to avoid humiliation. Secretly take money from his mother's purse for sweets to treat himself. Get rid of the annoying parakeet that had started squawking so annoyingly in the mornings, preventing him from sleeping. The most interesting thing was that his mother didn't notice Friend. He was invisible to her. It was especially fun to watch Friend jumping right in front of her, waving his hands and making faces, while she continued to go about her business as if nothing was happening, not seeing him. Arthur would start laughing, looking at this scene. His mother would look at him with apprehension and surprise, not understanding the reason for his laughter. She didn't understand what was going on, whom he was seeing. Arthur's mother finally had to admit one day that something was wrong with her son, that it wasn't just peculiarities of character. His behavior wasn't a consequence of his character. These were oddities of a completely different kind, requiring attention. His teachers advised her to take the child to a psychiatrist, noticing his detachment and strangeness. That's how Arthur got an official diagnosis, which his mother couldn't come to terms with. It was hard for her to accept it. She kept dragging her son to doctors, hoping that the verdict wouldn't be confirmed, that it was a mistake. But the doctors were unanimous. They named the same illness, the same diagnosis. The boy was transferred to homeschooling so he wouldn't go to a regular school. The young man sighed with relief. Not seeing the hated faces of classmates and teachers every day, avoiding bullying, what could be better than staying home? He wouldn't have lasted any longer in that atmosphere. But then, the treatment began. Pills, endless procedures, talks with psychologists, massages. Soon Arthur realized, because of all this, he was losing his connection with Friend, his only solace. Friend appeared less and less often and looked somehow pale, almost transparent, as if melting away. No, Arthur didn't want to lose the only close person who always understood and supported him. And so he categorically refused treatment, resisted. It was a difficult period, fighting for his friend. His mother and doctors insisted, threatened, forced treatment. The young man was even placed in a hospital, but he would spit out pills, lash out at the medical staff, bite, scratch, resisting. In short, he did everything to make them leave him alone, to leave him in peace. He fought as best he could for his only friend, for his vision of the world. Friend himself suggested a way out. He always found a solution. One day, he came and declared that it would be better for Artie to behave more compliantly, endure massages and physical therapy, and take all the pills except these small blue ones. It was better to spit them out, but discreetly, so no one would see. They were the ones driving him away, friend, depriving him of his strength. Arthur did as friend advised him, and life immediately became simpler. Everything got better. His mother and doctors calmed down. Artie was discharged from the hospital, considered to be on the mend. Some diagnoses were removed, considered erroneous. His mother was overjoyed. She thought the situation was improving. Her son was recovering. Arthur did somehow gradually learn to interact with other people and the world to pretend to be normal. Sometimes friend, his loyal friend, who was now always by his side, helping him, would tell him how to behave. It turned out that Arthur's fantasies about the invisible creatures inhabiting this world weren't delusion, but interesting, vivid ideas that could be brought to life. The young man started drawing everything he imagined in his head and posting these works online. Unexpectedly, they found their admirers. His creativity was appreciated. People wrote to Arthur saying he had talent, advised him to study design. Artie did just that, finished college, and then even got a job becoming a normal member of society. By that time, he had already learned to interact with the world and practically didn't stand out from the gray mass. He was like everyone else. Arthur pretended so well that his psychiatric diagnosis was even removed, considering him healthy. Friend would tell him what to answer doctors and how to behave to deceive them. No one noticed anymore that he was special or chosen, as friend called him, seeing something more in him. Arthur finished college, got his license, even made friends at work. It turned out that not all people were such moral degenerates as his classmates. The world wasn't so bad. You could communicate with some people. It was even interesting and pleasant. His mother rejoiced for her son, seeing his successes. She understood, of course, that there were strange things in his behavior, but she turned a blind eye to them. After all, Artie was a creative person. Such people have the right to originality, to their peculiarities. And then I met you. Arthur looked at Sarah through the bars with loving eyes, full of adoration. I understood that you had to become mine, and it couldn't be otherwise. It was fate. And friend said I was right that you were mine. Friend? Sarah repeated, not understanding who he was talking about. So he's still with you, this friend? Of course. Arthur nodded, his face becoming happy. He's standing right here next to me now, happy for me. A true friend, he'll never abandon me. So Arthur fell in love for the first time in his life, immediately, with all his heart, with all his soul. He became attached to Sarah. She became the center of his world. She seemed to him somehow unearthly, incredibly beautiful, kind, intelligent, the very, very best. Next to her, the man was filled with energy and strength. He felt alive. These were incredible sensations, new and strong. Arthur found her page on social media and spent hours looking at the woman's photos, admiring her eyes, her hair, her graceful figure, her smile. He thought he had liked Sarah at their first meeting, that she had also felt sympathy for him. All that remained was to meet again at the same game and invite the girl on a date. He was confident of success. Arthur thought Sarah would gladly agree. After all, she had looked at him like that. She had even been shy around him. She had responded to his game. But the woman refused. Her behavior changed. At their next meeting, she was very cold and detached, despite all of Arthur's attempts to win her favor, to show his best side. This hurt. It deeply wounded his ego. It also angered him, caused resentment. But friend, his loyal friend, ordered him not to give up and to continue the fight, to go all the way. And Arthur continued, following his advice. He wrote to Sarah on social media, waited for her after work with flowers, confessed his feelings, not hiding them. But it was all in vain. His efforts brought no results. The woman was only annoyed by his attention, his intrusiveness. And then she even started dating another man, Daniel. Arthur, of course, tracked him down, found out who he was. At first, he wanted to kill the chosen one of his beloved, physically destroy his rival. But friend talked him out of it, said it was dangerous, and suggested the option with the photos. A more cunning plan. Arthur liked this idea. It was original. He was skilled in photo editors. It wasn't difficult for him to create realistic pictures in which he and Sarah looked like a happy couple, hugging, kissing. How Arthur liked the result of this work? He could admire the resulting photos for hours and even almost believed that the moments captured in them had actually taken place in reality, in their life together. But most importantly, Sarah's man, Daniel, believed this story. It somehow turned out too easily. He believed it right away. Daniel broke up with Sarah. She was free again. The path was open. But this didn't change her attitude towards Arthur. It didn't bring her closer. On the contrary, learning what he had done, Sarah got angry. Instead of admiring his resourcefulness and persistence, she became afraid of him. That's when friends suggested the option with the cabin, with the captivity. He assured Arthur that Sarah would be with him only if she got to know him better, spent time with him. And since she categorically refused dates and meetings, the only option left was the cage, with forced communication. We stayed there for several weeks. Sarah recounted her incredible story in a calm, even voice, not betraying any emotion, as if it had happened to someone else. He would come every evening and stay with us until late at night, sometimes even stayed overnight. Sometimes he would even stay overnight with us, on the sofa opposite our cages, watching us. He brought delicious food, sometimes from a restaurant, sometimes homemade. He cooked himself. He fed us as if we were his honored guests whom he was hosting. And he constantly talked to me, tried to establish contact. Sometimes, when he wanted me to listen only to him, he would give Leo a music player. The boy would gladly put on headphones and go to the corner of the cage, shutting himself off from what was happening. Later, my son told me that in those moments, he would detach himself from what was happening, and it helped him not to go crazy. Arthur, when Leo couldn't hear, he would confess his love to me, talk about his feelings. In front of the child, apparently, he was shy. He didn't want to scare him. Did the man really have such strong feelings that he would do something like that? Ethan wondered, finding it hard to imagine all this. Everything Sarah said didn't fit into his head. It was beyond comprehension. So you still don't understand? Sarah looked at him with a slight sadness. He just became fixated on me. It wasn't love, it was obsession. I think it's a manifestation of his illness, a symptom. His diagnoses were officially removed back then in his adolescence, considering him healthy. But in reality, he's a deeply ill person with a distorted perception of reality. The examination confirmed this after our rescue. And I saw it myself even before he took me away. I felt it. And then I was completely convinced his behavior was abnormal. I was terrified of this imaginary friend of his, whom he saw and heard. Who knows what he might order him to do to us, what commands he might give. Sarah behaved calmly and neutrally with Arthur, trying not to provoke him. She pretended that she found him pleasant and interesting, but she didn't let him get close. She kept her distance, not giving him hope. She showed that she was still afraid of him, of his unpredictability. After all, he had promised not to even touch her until she herself let him into her life, until she loved him. So Sarah had to balance on the edge. On one hand, show favor so as not to anger him. On the other hand, remain detached and thereby keep Arthur at a safe distance, not giving him a reason. It seemed she was doing quite well. She was managing. But Sarah couldn't know how much longer she would be able to keep the situation under control, how long this captivity would last. She was waiting for the moment, waiting for a chance. She knew that sooner or later something would happen that would allow her and her son to break free, to gain freedom. She believed in it with all her soul, not losing hope. Sometimes Arthur would become strange, lethargic, listless, lifeless, as if energy was draining out of him. His eyes, usually burning with enthusiasm and admiration, would suddenly dim, become empty. It seemed he even started having headaches. He would grab his forehead with his hands, turn pale. In this state, Arthur frightened Sarah. His appearance was terrifying. It seemed that his reason temporarily left him, that he was losing control. What could be expected from a person in this situation when he was not himself? All she could do was hope that everything would be all right and he wouldn't harm them. Usually, the episodes, or whatever they were, passed quickly, as if he returned from another world. Arthur would immediately pull himself together and hastily leave the cabin, sometimes without even saying goodbye, as if running away somewhere, escaping. Sarah assumed that after what had happened, the man rushed home to take some important pill that helped him. One evening, as sometimes happened with him, Arthur suddenly seemed to shut down. His gaze became fixed. Just moments before, he had been describing to Sarah how he would take her to a tropical island where they will swim in warm ocean waters, live happily, and a moment later, he had turned into a person indifferent to everything, lost. At that moment, he dropped the key under the table, the key to the cage where Leo was locked. Several minutes passed, which seemed like an eternity. Arthur came to his senses and, as often happened, rushed out of the cabin without looking back, hurrying to leave. And the key remained on the floor, right under the table. Sarah saw that she could reach it. It was her chance. She reached for it, straining all her strength. She almost dislocated her shoulder, but she got the key. It was in her hands. Her heart was pounding wildly in her chest with excitement and hope. Were they really saved now? Was this the end of the nightmare? True, there were still many obstacles ahead. The path to salvation was not easy. Everything depended on Leo, on his courage and resourcefulness. Could the boy find his way in the dark? Would he get lost in the forest? Sarah, with difficulty, opened her son's cage door, inserting the key into the lock. He jumped out into the room, his eyes burning with determination, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, how do I open your door?" Leo asked, ready to help her. You can't. My door doesn't open. You have to run now. As fast as you can. Find your way to the road. Bring help, Sarah shouted. Realizing they had little time, Leo nodded briefly, understanding that there was no time for hysterics and unnecessary questions. He had to act. He grabbed a chair that was nearby and confidently smashed the window with it. Glass shattered. He pulled his sweater over his head, wrapped his hands in it so he wouldn't cut himself, and removed the remaining glass from the frame. Sarah was amazed. She wouldn't have thought of it so quickly. Wouldn't have figured it out. And then they both, mother and son, heard the sound of an approaching car. The sound of an engine. Arthur had discovered the missing key and decided to come back. He understood what had happened. Mom, it's him! What do we do? Panic sounded in Leo's voice. Fear had returned. Run! Just run with all your might, Sarah shouted, pushing him toward the window. And Leo, with the ease of a street cat, slipped out the window, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. A few minutes later, Arthur burst into the room, his face contorted with rage. Seeing the broken window and the open cage, he immediately understood everything and roared with fury like a beast. Sarah huddled in the farthest corner of her prison, preparing for the worst. She was ready for anything. Arthur would rush to catch Leo or attack her with his fists, venting his anger. But the man suddenly started crying, whimpering like a child. His rage replaced by despair. He sat right on the floor and sobbed, trembling all over, clutching his head in his hands. Why? Why are you doing this to me? He wailed through tears. I did everything for you. I would build a house, bring delicious food, take care of you. Did I treat you badly? Why? Why can't you love me, Sarah? Sarah was bewildered. Her feelings were mixed. Ideally, she should feel fear towards Arthur and hate him with all her soul for what he had done to them. But the woman felt very sorry for him. He looked so miserable. What was this? The notorious Stockholm Syndrome? When the victim develops sympathy for the tormentor? Artie, the woman said as gently as possible, addressing him by name, trying to calm him down. Artie, it's okay. Everything is all right. Everything will be all right. Do you hear? He looked up at her with eyes full of tears and hope. His face was bewildered. Arthur didn't look like a dangerous criminal, a maniac now. Before Sarah was a bewildered, deeply ill person in need of help. He started swearing his love to her again, talking about his feelings. Sarah said something in response, talking to Arthur, stalling for time, hoping that Leo would make it. Just let Leo make it to the road. Just let people notice the boy and help him. And then, Sarah had no idea how much time passed until the moment people in uniform burst into the cabin, rushing inside. How happy she was to see them. It was salvation. Two of them immediately restrained Arthur and led him outside, not allowing him to resist. The others began to search the room, looking around at everything. One of the police officers let Sarah out of the cage, opening the door. What a joy it was for the woman to walk through the forest, the fresh air, nature, space. Her captivity was behind her. The nightmare was over. Freedom is the best thing there can be in life, the most valuable. Sarah clearly realized this at that moment, feeling its taste. Well, and before that, you pretty much know everything. Sarah smiled at Ethan, finishing her story. The end of the story. a happy ending. Thank you again very much for your help, for stopping. Several cars drove past Leo and didn't stop. They ignored him, but you responded to the call for help. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about his own things, processing what he had heard. No, it wasn't in vain that fate had brought him and Sarah together. This meeting was not accidental. Her story, it helped him look at his own behavior in a new light, at his own obsession. Chloe. He was pursuing her just like Arthur pursued Sarah, showing the same persistence. If Arthur had at least some justification, a psychiatric diagnosis, an illness, then he, Ethan, had none. No justification at all. He had simply gotten it into his head that Chloe had to be his, as if the girl was just an object that had no right to her own opinion, to her own choice. Ethan decided to call Chloe today, without delay, to apologize for his behavior, for his intrusiveness and stalking, and to promise that he would stop trying to win her over, that he would leave her in peace.